All right, you primitive screwheads, listen up.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Here's Johnny.
Vanity. Definitely my favorite sin.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
The power of Christ compels you!
This is my boomstick!
What's your favorite scary movie?
Heads and welcome to Shiver, a horror movie podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Daniel DeBona.
And I'm David Ulloa.
And David, we are glad to have you back as we continue on our space horror. You missed a weird one last week.
I wasn't able to catch it, and I haven't put the episode out yet, so I haven't listened. But I figured, like, with 824, like, it can't be bad.
No, it's not bad. That was one of the final conclusions that we came to was it's not bad. We just don't know how good it is exactly. It was a very, very bizarre experiment of a film that made us stretch what we consider horror. But anyway, if you're watching now, High Life will be dropping soon. Check that out with me and Michael Hunger. But we are back this week to take you into a movie that is honestly one of the definitions of space horror. And this is. We are talking Event Horizon. So in a category that we're calling space horror at its most gruesome. Dave, tell us what you think about Event Horizon.
Okay. We've been talking about Event Horizon without doing Event Horizon since we started this fucking show.
Correct.
So, spoiler alert for those of you that are not too quick on the uptake. I love this fucking movie. This movie is one of my favorite horror movies. Like, if I were to come up with a list of 10 horror movies, it would probably kill me because I would have to qualify 10 movies. But this would definitely make the list. Like, this movie is, I think, just one of the most perfect horror movies. It is so damn scary. I think very few movies are able to scare me the way that this movie does, because it taps into something that is very frightening for me, and I think it's very frightening for all of us: the fear of the unknown.
Right.
What is out there? We in a very Lovecraftian way, this movie scares me because we are a speck in space. We're tiny. And if our planet is a speck in space, what am I?
Right.
That alone can drive people insane. And that's what Lovecraft was all about. And so when you start thinking like, man, I feel powerless on my own planet, in my own reality. What happens when you play God? What happens when you bend the rules of physics and start saying, well, it's possible, why don't we? That shit is terrifying to me because it's not realistic at all. It's definitely fantasy, even though they get the science right. You know, it's not faster than light travel. You're warping space. It's warp drive. They don't call it warp drive, but it is, you know. And we have scientists right now working on this. So the science is there, but it's fantasy. And it's fantasy that I think terrifies me to my very core.
Yeah, this movie. So this movie came out in 97. I saw it for the first time not long after that. It was probably 98, 99 when I saw it. But the last time I saw this movie was early 2000s. So it's been upwards of 20 years since I have actually sat down and watched Event Horizon. Like, I had flashes of remembering this movie, but oh my God, sitting down and watching it from beginning to end again, this movie is terrifying. Michael Hunger watched it today, texted me, and was just like, well, Event Horizon is nightmare fuel. And I was like, absolutely.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
100% what it is. And that's what makes it so scary. We talk all the time about movies that have a dreamlike quality. Those movies where we're not 100% sure what's real, what's going on, how much of it we can buy into. This movie goes and it dovetails from like two separate things, which are one, a nightmare-like quality, which is here all the things that you dread, are afraid of, and they're made real. But then it also has a very hard line where it's like, but all of this is fucking real. These things are here. Lawrence Fishburne at one point says, I was not hallucinating. I could feel the heat from the flames. There's no dreamlike quality to the way that the crew members of the Lewis and Clark are experiencing these things. They are experiencing these things as real as anything you've ever done. And so, one, that's horrifying. Two, the way that it's not just about the unknown, because yes, we don't know what any of this is, but the fact that it was personalizing everybody's torture. The fact that it was digging into people's it was digging into people's psyches and creating what the most horrific situations were for them. Would it be awful if I were in a sick bay and I saw a child whose legs had like maggots and were decaying? Yes, absolutely. But would it have had the same effect on me as it did Dibs? Because not Dibs, that was from last week. But the doctor here, the medical officer, because it was her child, right? Seeing a man on fire, horrifying. That being a man that you let burn to death in order to save some other people, that's horrifying. Worse. This movie is so scary. And what's amazing is if you follow us on Instagram, I posted up like a bunch of scenes of how gruesome this thing is. In the grand scheme of things, the absolute really gruesome stuff is minuscule. It all happens in just like split frames where it's just like boom, boom, boom. Look at all of this. Like to get
with really poor lighting, and it's done on purpose. It's not like they didn't have budget. It's like, no, this is terrifying.
Yeah, but like so it's one of those things where like the stories of subliminal advertising where it's like, well, we showed you a picture of a soda for one frame and now you're thirsty. It's that, but it's like, hey, here's a maggot covered head with a spear poking through its mouth, but we're only going to show it to you for a quarter of a second. So you're going to spend the rest of your life wondering if that's what you really just saw, or if you're imagining horrible things as brought on by this movie. It fucks with us, the audience, as much as the ship itself fucks with the characters in the movie. And that's scary too.
To support that point, I looked for roughly 10 minutes for a background wallpaper for our podcast tonight. Almost every single thing that I found, like the clips from the movies, the stills from the movies, were, I thought, too much for someone who would just be stumbling upon the show. And I
just like my mom's, or well, my mom is a different story, but someone's mom that like I'm friends with, just like a mom that I'm friends with, they're scrolling through and just sees a background. It's like, oh, that's an eyeless corpse.
Right. And that was the thing, is like I've got friends at work who listen because they, they're friends. I've got family that occasionally stops in and watches because they're family. A fan would appreciate it, but even someone who doesn't know us and maybe is just searching for something on YouTube and stumbles across that, I would feel personally responsible if they saw Sam Neill in all his glory at the end of the film, posted up here, big to see. So like the imagery of this movie is unlike, I don't want to say unlike anything else, because it is Hellraiser-esque.
Right. I mean, they even use the line, I have such things to show you.
Yeah, and it works. To me, it almost feels like it could exist in the Hellraiser universe, except that it's better than just about any Hellraiser movie.
Yeah. It definitely is. So let's get into what makes it so damn good. And in a section that we're calling Save Yourself from Hell. I mean, the story of this movie is pretty simple, right? It's a rescue mission. Let's go get the ship that's been missing. I mean, what do you think about it taking us from A to B to C here?
Look, this movie could be summed up, I think, in 3 words: Shining in space. That's pretty much it.
Right.
You know, if The Shining is a haunted hotel on Earth, the Event Horizon is a haunted spaceship in space.
Right.
And I think once you understand that, you understand the movie. And all of the other backstory, all of the context that they provide does make the movie better. But it's also not necessary.
Right.
And this is one of those instances where I don't think they over-explain themselves. But I think that they were concerned that people wouldn't get it.
Right.
And in the fear of people not understanding what is going on, really dove deep into a mythology that has never been delved into again.
Right.
And I'm not saying that I want a franchise. What I am saying is that I would not be upset in the slightest if the world of Event Horizon were explored deeper.
Right. Like a prequel about the actual Event Horizon.
Yeah. If you show me what happened on the Event Horizon, but the thing is that it's so gruesome that I don't know if you could make that movie.
Yeah.
You know, like what we get in the logs, I will never, ever, ever in my life not dread pushing play on this film and seeing the captain of the Event Horizon holding his eyeballs, saying "Liberate tutame ex infernus." Wow, man! Like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. You know, like that's the sort of thing that sticks with you. And truthfully, I mean, I made the allusion to Hellraiser earlier. I don't think there's a single thing in Hellraiser that scares me quite like that. All those scenes, the moment you hear people screaming on the audio that Sam Neill plays back as as Dr. Weir.
Yes.
My heart jumps into my throat. And I've seen this movie countless times because I saw this movie a little later than you did. I want to say I started buying Blu-ray discs sometime around like 2004. Whenever the PlayStation 3 came out, 04, 05, right. Something like that. And this was one of the very first Blu-rays I bought because my parents wouldn't let me go see it in theaters. I was like 10, right? Neither did I want to go see it at that age. But I remember going. I remember going to Blockbuster and wanting desperately to rent it. And for one reason or another, that was one of the movies they had heard about. And they were like, "No, you're not going to watch that one." I said, "Okay, fine. Whatever. I'm not going to argue. I'm not the argue with my parents kind of guy. I just turn around and find a way to do it without them knowing."
Right.
So, when I started buying Blu-rays, I remember I walked into a Virgin Megastore, and I was like, "That one." I bought Commando, and I bought this on the same day, and I went home and I watched it on a TV I had bought for myself with the money I had saved up all summer long, and I popped this thing in, and it won't ever escape me. I still feel like that 18-year-old kid watching this for the first time. Like, what the fuck is going on aboard the Event Horizon?
Dude,
like that's not normal screaming.
Like I can what's crazy, like just similar type thing about like, I don't even remember the friend's name that like I watched this with, but I can still perfectly picture like his living room where we were sitting watching it. Like, I don't remember the dude's name at all or what he looked like. I don't remember anything about him, but I can still perfectly picture sitting in this living room and seeing that scene. And it's something.
It sticks with you.
Yeah.
And truly, while I believe that the story doesn't matter here, we just need a reason for this crew to go out there. It could have been that they were a scavenger crew and happened upon a distress signal. It could have been anything. It really doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't even need to be in space.
Right.
That's the thing. That's the thing about this that I think really works, because space horror, if it is really about space, is not interesting, because we don't really know. We don't really know space. When you make space horror about people and about the things that we fear, then it becomes interesting. It's just like ghosts. Ghosts in and of themselves are not scary.
Right.
What are they? A bit of like energy and goop? That's not scary. That's not scary. But if you make that ghost about something that we're afraid of, then it is. And this movie is really about that. This movie is about the shit that keeps you up at night. That stuff that haunts you. That's what it haunts you with. So we're constantly being haunted by his wife, fiance, girlfriend, whoever his romantic partner was. Her suicide haunts him.
Yes.
And the fact that the way that this story plays that out is little by little, piece by piece. By the time he varied 2001: A Space Odyssey to keep it, very, space related, gets that sort of like, here's a vignette here and here's a vignette there, and there's all these little tiny things that we're seeing that finally piece together at the end, and we see his life play out, that one bit of his life that haunts him.
Right.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant.
Yeah. There are so many things about this movie that make it feel unique and like nothing else, right? But ultimately, when you start to dissect it, you do see that every bit of this is something else, right? We've already talked about The Shining and Hellraiser, now 2001, right? I mean, every bit of this is something else, but it is all of those things executed to the nth degree. That's what makes this good. This story is familiar. Let's go out there. Let's see what there is. Oh, no, it's bad. And now we're all going to die. And so that story is familiar enough that you're never trying to guess, right? You don't get so wrapped up in trying to figure out what's going on because the story gets so deep that you're trying to solve a mystery, and you're not just letting this imagery kind of hit you in the face. And I mean, and it assaults you. You can enjoy this story because it's Alien. It's right. An alien. It's like, oh, distress signal. Let's go see what it is. All hell's breaking loose on our ship. I mean, it's Shining. Oh, it's all of our worst fears come to life, and we're living them out in very real ways that only we're experiencing. It's all of these things. So to call this story unique is wrong. But to call this movie unique is not wrong because of the approach that it takes to delivering this tale as old as time type thing.
It would be like calling Jurassic Park unoriginal.
Right. Exactly.
Which is like technically fair. I mean, it all goes back to King Kong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But watch Jurassic Park in 1993 and say that's unoriginal, because you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the things that kind of hit me as I was watching this movie last night is how even when the story is kind of lacking and it's like, okay, right now we're just waiting on the ship to get repaired. Nobody's really doing anything. So we're just building these terrifying moments. Something that you mentioned, they never really over explain. Right, we get like two really in-depth explanations from Dr. Weir about how this works. And I love the little fold up the poster, show the punch, through space. All of that stuff they do so that they can explain, okay, look, so that's what maybe a black hole does. And we opened up a black hole. And hence the reason we've called the ship the Event Horizon. So they do all of that. And then later on, we kind of get like, a little bit more when it's like, oh, the 3 rings contain this and that. But it never makes you feel stupid, or you never have to like pause it and like Google a bunch of words or anything like that. They do a great job of telling all of these things that I sat down last night after the movie and I did Google a bunch of words and I did kind of look into, because last week, I know you haven't caught you. Last week I was caught off guard by the word spaghettification, which I thought Hunger made up on the spot, and it's a real thing. And so I was like, yes, I'll be goddamned if that's going to happen to me today. So so I'm sitting there like reading, and I just fell down this rabbit hole of like, explain to me quantum physics like I'm 5 type things. And basically everybody just fell back to the way that Sam Neill explained it in this movie. And I was like, that's great, because I felt like I understood when I was watching the movie, and I needed to know if it really was that way. So I loved that element of the story. I loved that we're never given full backstories on anybody, but what we're let in on is the darkest, most horrific shit of their life as they're being forced to relive it. So to us, it is horrifying, this imagery that we're being assaulted with. But then you also, when you learn how the ship is thinking and how the dark works, then you're just dragged even further into how scary this is, because these are these people's worst possible moments. Imagine all those times you've woken up in the middle of the night and remembered the time you got a boner in science class in 8th grade, right? And just multiply that by 1,000. And that's what's happening to them, except for the equivalent would be waking up and you're surrounded by your 7th grade science class and have a boner, but now you're a grown-ass man. Like, that's the only way to kind of put you on this level, unless you've experienced some of the horrible trauma that these people have been through. It's scary in the fact that it's imperceptible to have to relive something like this. And it's scary in the fact that there could be something you've never told anyone, but the dark can see it. This movie, I was ready to fire it up last night and be like, I remember most of what happens here. Like, I'm not going to be that scared. But I was sitting there like it was my first time again. Even knowing what was going to happen, anticipating it almost made it worse. It took away the jump scares, but every once in a while something would happen and I'd go, oh God, this is, she's chasing that kid. Here comes the hole. And then you find yourself just screaming at her to stop running because she's going to hit that hole, and you know it. I would venture.
That's how nightmares work.
Yes, that makes it scarier, because no matter how many times you can watch this movie, it's always going to play out the same way. No matter how many times you have that same nightmare that you've been having since you were 7, it's always going to happen the same way. There's an element of that in this movie that makes the replay value of this so ridiculously high, because if you look into certain theological explanations of what hell is, yes, there's your standard Dante's Inferno. It's ice, it's fire, it's all the bad people. But there's also this idea that hell is no different than heaven. You're just trapped reliving horrible shit that you can't do anything about, versus getting to relive all the good stuff. And so that's what watching this movie is, even on repeat, even for the 3rd, 4th, 5th time. It's every time is scary, because this is hell. They did such an amazing job of bringing hell to the big screen. And I'm so glad that I sat down and watched this again after so long last night.
Personal story. Couple of months ago,
Got a
I have
boner
a
in the
2
science class.
Wouldn't you believe it? I stood up and everyone was pointing at me laughing. So I've got a 2-year-old, right? And a couple of months ago, so he's, I don't know, maybe a year and a half. He's discovering that there's more than one way to get out of a chair. And while we were at my parents' house outside having dinner, they've just cooked some hot dogs on a grill. He's eating a hot dog. He decides, I'm gonna get out of this chair, and he does not do his usual, scoot out of the chair. He decides, I'm gonna jump out of this chair.
It seems faster.
And it was faster. And he landed totally flat, like a belly flop, on tiled patio.
Oof.
Right? So the belly may have broken his fall a little bit, but he's got a big head. And so whack right into the fucking patio. He comes up, he's crying, and I'm like, poor fucking guy, But he's got blood all over his fucking face. And I'm like, okay, might be his nose, might be his lip. So I take him inside, and he's absolutely inconsolable. He's never hurt himself this way before or since, right? He chipped a tooth. I'm like, okay, so it's probably coming from the lip. And as I'm cleaning out his lips and his mouth, I see what I believe to be that he has split his tongue.
Oof.
And I'm like, motherfucker's gonna bleed to death from there. Like, I've got to get him to the hospital.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, let me clean this up as much as I can, and then I'll get him in the car and we can go. And there is a lot of blood inside his mouth. And then I see, I can't really see, right? Because it's in his mouth and he's crying. And then I see a piece of tongue just like flopping around in there. I'm like, motherfucker bit his tongue off. He bit off his tongue. And I'm getting fucking like palms sweaty right now thinking about this. Stephanie's standing over me and she's pointing the flashlight of her phone into his mouth. And she was like, is that really? And I'm like, dude, I don't fucking know. So I'm like, he can swallow this thing and choke to death. Like, cause he's like inconsolable. He's crying, not stopping. So I reach in to take the piece of tongue to put that shit on ice so they can like maybe surgically put it back on.
Right.
It was a fucking hot dog. He hadn't finished chewing on his hot dog. But inside the mouth, when that piece of hot dog is covered in ketchup and blood, I thought it was his tongue. If I were to relive one moment in my entire life in hell, it would be that moment. Steph, when she retells that story, talks about how she saw me age 5 years in that one moment.
Whole
Thinking that my son had, look at this. Look at all this. If you're watching live, you can see the fucking gray. I mean, who would do that to themselves? No,
right.
Like, that's all natural, that if I were forced to relive that moment for another instant, that would be hell. So to have to redo that, right? Like fucking Fishburne having to see that guy again and hear his voice. Fuck, man.
Yeah.
That's hell. And I think I think that is the best depiction of hell that we've gotten on film.
Yes. Yeah, no, 100%. And that's the thing. And that was like I said, the kind of the conclusion that I came to afterwards was when a movie like this, when you watch it over and over again, you know the outcome. You know what's going to happen. But if it can still scare you like that, then that's something really special. And so I loved all of that. Like I said, I loved the science of it. I loved between the interactions between the entire crew felt like a group of people who spend so much time together but genuinely love each other. And that was something that kind of carried this movie too. You've got the one guy who just came in, everybody just kind of keeps telling him to fuck off. And then you've got, but then when they tell each other to fuck off, it's loving, and so there's, all of it's great. And man, the imagery in this movie, you talked about the low lighting being on purpose. Wow. Dude, the lighting for this movie is top notch. The way that they're constantly just barely lighting certain things when they first get on the bridge of the event horizon, and we get the lights that kind of flicker behind them, and we just see like viscera, it's like spread on the walls back there, but they don't even notice it yet. So you're just sitting there waiting for them to see it.
And the beautiful thing is, the more you rewatch this movie, the more you're like, fuck, turn around, see it already. Yes. I know it's there. Why don't you know it's there? Oh man, this movie's so damn good.
Yeah, there's so many amazing production decisions made in this. I mean, Paul W.S. Anderson is, the guy is no slouch. He's made his fair share of goofy movies. I personally love the Resident Evil franchise. I think it's just fun to watch.
Yeah.
I love his Death Race. I love so many things that he's done, but man, I feel like his entire career has just been chasing how perfectly they shot this particular movie, because you're right. Every single time I watch it, not only am I basically screaming at the TV for them to see these things, but I'm noticing other little things. Last night, I noticed a bunch of just like intricate details about the command panels and stuff like that might not have been his thing directly that he figured out, but those things are elaborate, and everything seems to be labeled with like a real word, like to the point that when you're looking at it, it doesn't just look like a bunch of buttons with nothing to do. I felt like that looked like a functional control panel, and I loved that. I love watching this movie in 2024 and realizing that in Paul Anderson's opinion, we colonized the moon 9 years ago.
Right. I love going back and thinking about these things like afterwards, like 2019, it's like, hey, Blade Runner just fucking happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I did love that. I do love that 2047 is far enough in the future that you can still kind of enjoy this. Like, I don't know, maybe, right? So and I'm sure, and in 97, 98, whenever I watched this, I was like, oh man, that 2015, we'll definitely, be back on the moon by then, Here we are defunding NASA or whatever we've got going on at the moment. I don't know. So
right.
There are so many things about this movie that you can talk about. Well, like you said, summing up the story in 3 words, but then you can still talk about how amazing everything that happened in this is. And that's one of the things I love about film in general, but especially horror, is that we have the ones where it's like, all right, here we go, 40 minutes. Let's talk about the story. And then we have the ones where like shining in space. Let's talk about what was scary. And that doesn't, neither of those things makes a good or bad movie. Sometimes no story works. Sometimes it doesn't. And so this is one where no story worked.
Yeah. And yet there is story. And to kind of support your point about lighting, and now this is not the set designer or the gaffer here, but cinematographer for this movie, because we're talking about how like the imagery and all of that worked for this movie. You may have seen V for Vendetta, but you definitely have seen a little picture called Aliens.
Right.
This guy, I mean, has influenced the way science fiction looks for years.
Yeah.
So, and every little set piece, every way that it is photographed, it's just perfect, and
Dude,
helps tell that story.
those doors that go into the engineering bay are just ridiculously ominous looking. Like as soon as those things open, yeah, and they've got like teeth on them. Like as soon as they open, you're like, well, nothing behind those is good. You know, like two weeks ago, we had a door that looked like we had a space door that looked like a giant butthole. This thing looked like an actual gate to hell. I can assume that that's what the gates of hell would look like. They would be that thick and they'd have teeth and they look like if you fuck around, they're going to cut your hand off.
I've played Doom. I know. And that's kind of the thing where it's like when Captain Miller is asking Dr. Weir, like, where does it go? Like, what happens? And he says, I don't know. It's like, I think you do know, because you wouldn't have designed this ship in this way if you didn't know. This thing is this thing is an armada of Hellspawn. You just look at it, and it's fucking creepy.
He knew that's the thing. Weir had to have known that there was a possibility that, like we talked about back when we were doing Ghosts, of doors swinging both ways. And if they could go through, then something could come back, because there was an entire plan to separate the engineering bay where this man-made black hole existed from the front of the ship where everything else happened. There was a contingency for what if something comes back. So for as much as he's walking around, I don't know. But at that point, you know, the ship had a hold of him. You know, that wasn't too long before he just disappears into the shadows. I am home. And then disappears into the shadows. You know, so he knew that was a possibility, because once you punch that hole, it's just that. It's a hole. Yeah, sure. You go through, but wherever you end up, that stuff could come. If you are physically warping and bending reality to your will, then everything that's on the other side of that is welcome to hear. And they knew it was a possibility. That's why these doors look like they did. That's why that big long corridor was there full of explosives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can sit here and talk about how much this thing terrifies us all night, because we're 37 and a half minutes in. And we could keep going. So let's move on and let's talk about the cast. So in a section that we're talking a crew of misfits, Daniel, who here do you feel like I've got to talk about this person? Like, this is someone who like immediately caught my attention.
So they're the really obvious ones, and that I know we'll get to. But the one that I want to start with is Cooper.
Yes. He's so awesome.
Richard Jones as Cooper is so great in this movie, especially because you go and you watch through this, and like Cooper never actually experienced anything like super fucked up except for like hearing something one time. This poor guy is just living with everybody else's bullshit that the ship is bringing to life. He is just constantly fighting everybody else's trauma while trying to bang the XO. Like that's what he's got going for it. Right? Like he's so funny. You know, his introduction is the whole, do you want something black and hot inside of you? You know,
what a line. I mean, it's not a good one, but it is a line, and he pulls it off. You know, if he hasn't pulled before with that,
right,
I would find it hard to believe.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, the guy has done a ton of things. But this particular role, he's just so funny. And then, you know, he ends up getting blown off the ship and surviving, manages to get back just to like be shot off the ship again as the front window that you can kind of see in the background here decompresses, still manages to get around to an airlock and survive. Coop puts up with so much bullshit for a guy who genuinely just wanted to get laid and wanted the best for everybody. And
Yeah.
what's amazing about the portrayal of his character is that for all the times that he's portrayed as just this cocky, Lothario type guy, man, when he finds out that the ensign, whose last name is a first name, Justin, is in trouble, he is tearing ass to save him. Like, there is nothing that matters more than saving Justin the second his line starts getting pulled through. And you see him, and I mean, he physically pulls him back out of this black hole in 0G. He ends up being portrayed as this very smart character who's introduced as such a goofball, but he ends up being one of the absolute toughest motherfuckers there. And he's never portrayed as not smart because he's the one who gets the ship fixed, right? He's out there with the other guy, with Smitty. They're literally just like welding pieces over this crack, but he's the reason they had a chance at getting back at all before Dr. Weir blew up the Lewis and Clark. He ended up being kind of like a bit part in the cast who was amazing. And I love him so much.
He is the comic relief in a movie that desperately needs comic relief, because the subject matter is so dark, and the horrors that are on display are so gruesome that you need that balance. And I think that that's something that we've learned in talking about slashers extensively, is that however gruesome your kills are, your comedy needs to be just as on point.
Right.
And so he is very, very funny, but he's never portrayed as stupid, like you said, because it's very easy to fall into that trap of like, oh, okay, well, the funny guy is going to be an idiot. And he's never portrayed as an idiot, because Captain Miller is extremely proud of every single member of his crew. And he's the guy who's like, whoa, hang on a second, man. Just fucking explain yourself in like plain English so that everyone here understands, because like, and then Captain Miller's the other one who's like, try us. I guarantee you will understand what the fuck you're going to say. And then of course, he goes well above their pay grade, and it's like, okay, man, bring it down a little bit. We're smart, but we're not geniuses. So he ends up being the most resourceful character in this movie.
Yeah.
And bucks the that sort of trope that everyone talks about in the horror movie, where like the black guy dies first. And it's not him, it's not Captain Miller, right? In fact, he's one of the few that survive.
Yeah.
and you want him, like, if there is one person that you're rooting for to survive in this movie, it's probably Cooper. It might be Miller, but it's also probably Cooper. Dude, great fucking choice. Okay, so now I have to think, because that's who I was going to talk about first. Okay, it's the obvious one, but Sam Neill as Dr. Weir. I have to talk about this performance because for one reason or another, we have not yet talked about a Sam Neill movie.
Yeah, we have.
Nope, that's not true. We did In the Mouth of Madness. We did. And I'm pretty sure we talked about him then too.
Yes.
What a fucking actor, dude. Like this guy, like whatever the male equivalent of a scream queen is, Sam Neill is also.
Yes.
And he is just fucking perfect, because I know from the very first time that he starts talking about who he is, because you don't know at first. It's just like, oh, it's Sam Neill, so he's probably a bad guy, right? But from the very first moment that he opens his mouth, like, nah, I don't fucking trust that guy. I don't fucking trust him. There's something wrong with him. There's something off about him. He's totally giving us Damien vibes, from that Third Omen movie. I question, and I still don't know, and I've seen this movie at least 10 times. I question whether he actually designed this ship to get from point A to point B, or whether he designed this ship to traverse the kind of segments of hell that it goes through when it gets to the other side. I don't know. Because we don't know how long it's been since his wife committed suicide.
Right.
And it could very well be that the whole reason that he built this ship was see what was on the other side.
Yeah.
It's possible. It's possible that he wanted to open a gateway, and that this whole thing has just been a way for him to communicate with his wife. And then it's also possible that he was influenced by whatever was on the other side. Maybe whatever experiments he had been doing with warping space-time had already made him susceptible to whatever forces were on the other side of that gate. And those things influenced him to build this thing so that they had a stronger hold on our reality. I don't know. He plays this thing so damn good that I still, all these years later, question what the fuck is actually going on with this movie, and what is going on with him. What is his motivation? Is he really driven by his work, which is what drove his wife away, or is it that he's driven by finding her or stopping the dreams of her? What is his motivation? I don't know. He's such a complex character that the movie ends and I want to push play again so I can figure it out even more.
Yeah, no, it's the thing about his character, well, one, just Sam Neill in general, is when you watch this, you see that same type of thing that we saw in the Mouth of Madness, where you see a guy who seems like the smart, rational guy, and by the end of it, or / the beginning of In the Mouth of Madness, we have watched him just completely descend into chaos incarnate. And Sam Neill continually does that in movies and is amazing in it, and we love him for that. I think that there is an argument to be made here for exactly what you were talking about, and that is the fact that, did he create this ship for some sort of Orpheus and Eurydice type thing? Was he trying to get to hell? Because we don't know how religious he is, but we know that his partner committed suicide. So is he trying to get to hell because ultimately he wanted to bring her back? Is he? And so, for as much as there's the I don't know, but then he suddenly seems very in tune with what the ship is doing, that you are led to wonder, was this guy really exploring the cosmos, or did he want to find out if there was a way to go rescue his partner? Is there something to that? And I had that thought for the first time last night as well, because that storyline of watching her torture him is evident in the movie before they even make it to the event horizon.
Because it's the very first thing you see.
Yes. So there's also an interesting argument here for the fact that whether or not, like when he sees her, when he's crawling around the ducts trying to fix the fuses, whether or not that's the ship fucking with him, or if he was already going insane. And so I do think that there is a very, very good argument to be made that he did intend to punch through not just time and space, but reality as we know it, to find out what's on the other side in a very flatliners type way, but by remaining alive himself. And I think that once they got there, he knew immediately that this fucking ship had brought stuff back from the other side, because I think that he intended for it to go there. And that's why, even though everybody's saying, look, I saw it, and all he does is play it off like they're all idiots. No, you don't know what you're talking about. With all due respect, go fuck yourself. He's not, he doesn't give any credence to what anybody else is saying because he doesn't want them to know what he has unleashed on purpose. He wants plausible deniability for this whole thing until the wheels are completely off and there's no reason to lie about it anymore. He is home because ultimately what he wanted to do was get to the other side and be with his woman. That was where he always planned on being, was with Holly. And so that's why it seems like a really stark turn. Like, I mean, it's a hard left from you guys don't know what you're talking about, nothing's going on here, to him sitting in the chair, the captain's chair, and revealing everything in one broad ass stroke. And what's amazing about Sam Neill is, even though that is a really hard left, and even though, yes, we're creating some, we're expanding here, we're creating some headcanon, his performance is so good that I don't think anybody would ever look at this theory and just be like, that's ridiculous. You guys are idiots. I think that his performance is so rock solid that anybody could watch this movie with that in their brain and be like, oh shit. Because he gives that the entire time. And I love it.
And you made two fantastic points that I love here. The movie starts with Claire being on his mind, and we find out that this is something that has already transpired, and where I think most people go to in this movie is that Claire was aboard the Event Horizon, and that's why he wants to get back. I think that that's the logical place to go to.
Right.
I don't know if that's where you went when you first saw this.
Not necessarily.
I thought that's why he wants to get back to the Event Horizon. That's why he wants to find out what happened there, because he designed the ship that she got lost on. And I think that that's really great storytelling, because as we start finding out that all this stuff happened there, when we finally see that the captain of the Event Horizon is going through his command crew and she's not there, it's like there's no Claire there. Then why is he haunted by Claire? And then we find out that Claire killed herself because of the Event Horizon, not that Event Horizon killed her. It's very possible then for the Event Horizon to be the culmination of his work specifically so that he can go back and get her. The second point that you made that I fucking loved, and I've never put this together before, was the how much this calls back to Orpheus and Eurydice.
Yeah.
That Greek myth is one of my all-time favorites, but also there's like one little tiny piece of the story which ends up being one of the saddest endings of that story, because everyone remembers Orpheus goes back to get Eurydice. Yeah, Orpheus does go back to get Eurydice, but Orpheus is also told, don't look at her. Don't look to the past, man. You got to look to the future. And all that Weird does is exist in the past.
Right.
He built this thing was the culmination of years of work, except that was 7 fucking years ago when you built this thing, and the thing fucking failed. Or did it? Did it do exactly what you wanted to do? What have you been doing in these last 7 years? Have you just been sitting there wallowing in the pain of losing your wife, losing the ship? Nothing has gone the way that you've wanted it to. All he does is look back on that stuff, and then all hell breaks loose. It's so fucking perfect. I'm so glad you brought that up, man, because I had never put that shit together before.
Yeah, I mean, down to the fact that he gouges out his own eyes. I mean, he can't physically look anymore because he realizes that he's stuck in that place of looking back, and it becomes that thing. Well, it's like, well, then I'll just take these out. I can't look at her and ruin this whole thing if I don't have eyes. Right. So, yeah, I mean, all of that is believable as canon because of Sam Neill's performance here. And like you said, yeah, he's a scream king. I mean, the guy has just continually done so much. So the other side of the Sam Neill coin, of course, is Lawrence Fishburne as Captain Miller.
Oh yeah.
And Lawrence Fishburne doing Lawrence Fishburne, man. I mean, you know, there are actors like Lawrence Fishburne and Denzel Washington where it's like it's always the same character, but it always works. Right? There's not a lot of difference between Morpheus and Captain Miller. Right?
And I'm okay with that because that's what I want.
Exactly. Because that's why you cast Lawrence Fishburne. He's so good as just this hard-nosed guy who's looking out for everybody else. But then we get that really soft moment where he tells the story about losing Korik in the fire. And man, that scene, and he's sitting there. Have you ever seen fire in 0G? It's beautiful. And he's like, it moves in waves. Just that whole way he tells that story. I can't for a second imagine anybody else delivering that bit. He was so good. He was paternal with his crew when he needed to be. He let them cut up when they needed to cut up. He wasn't taking shit off Dr. Weir. He did such a great job in that role. Down to his eventual sacrifice to make sure that he didn't lose any more men.
Yeah. No, you're right, man. He's perfect. And sure, you can make that argument that Fishburne is always Fishburne. And I don't think anyone is going to disagree with you there. However, I mean, you look back on like the AFI list of like the 10 greatest actors of all time.
Right.
It's Bogey, it's the Duke, it's these guys, and it's like I watched movies with them for them, not because they were some great character actor. Because there are great character actors. Yeah. And you watch them for the characters that they put on. But that's not why you watch someone like Lawrence Fishburne. You want him to Fishburne the fuck out of the movie.
Yeah.
Does. I totally buy him as the captain of the ship. I buy him as the guy who needs to make sure that his team survives. And when he can't ensure that anymore, doesn't know who he is. Except that he's got to make sure that the rest of the team survives. And when I got to make sure the rest of the team is dwindling. It's like, okay, I had a team of 5, and now I'm down to a team of 4, and now I'm down to a team of 3, but I'm going to make sure those 3 survive. He's always telling himself, I'm going to make sure that the rest are okay. I'm going to make sure. He is spectacular here. Absolutely spectacular. And the fact that he's not perfect, that he is haunted in the same way that everyone else is, it would have been very easy, I think, to focus on everyone else, but they didn't.
Right.
In fact, I think a lot of the haunting takes place specifically with Weir and Miller. You do get others, right? Because Peters as a mother is haunted by her son, but I think arguably one of the bigger names at this time was Jolie Richardson, and she doesn't get much of the haunting. And and I think to put the onus on Fishburne is, number one, testament to how great an actor he is. But number two is also like the weight of the character in this movie is immense. And he really does show a good way of looking at things and saying, I'm flawed. I've made mistakes before, but I'm learning from those mistakes, or I have learned from those mistakes, and I'm not going to let them haunt me. Except that that's exactly what happens here. So like his character in a lot of ways does show us that you cannot escape the things that must haunt you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I said, he was stellar. Also, just other connection. Him and Richard T. Jones were both in What's Love Got to Do with It, playing Ike Turner and Ike Turner Jr. So,
yeah. There you go. Okay, so I'm gonna pick one more person, and I'm really torn. All right, I'm just gonna go. Jason Isaacs as DJ. Man, I almost expected him to it was like, does this movie exist in the Alien universe or does it exist in the Hellraiser universe? Because if this is in the Alien universe, this guy's fucking Bishop, dude.
Right.
And he's Bishop in his own unique way, and I fucking love it. Like, he's so disconnected from everything.
Yeah.
Nothing seems to phase him. He's like, I got to get the fucking job done. And I think that he does that better than anyone else here. His lack of humanity is what makes him, I think, most human, because he's like, I have to get back home. I have to survive.
Right.
And he does that by ignoring all emotion. It's such a crazy dichotomy of the survival tactic. It's awesome. And he is a spectacular actor. We all know him as Lucius Malfoy from Harry Potter, and it's very easy to just think of him as a bad guy.
Right.
Because there are certain roles that, like, once you play that thing, you're that for fucking ever, man.
Yeah.
You know, this is granted years before Harry Potter, because Harry Potter, I think, was 2001, 2002, something like that was the first one.
Right.
And he gives us such a dynamic performance. This could very easily have been played like an android.
Yes,
and it
100%.
And it wasn't, because I got human from this guy. I got really fucking human from this guy. Someone who cares about the rest of the crew, but not so much that he values them over himself. And I've talked about this before. Like, I never see myself reflected in the hero character, because I'm not that guy. I know, I think I'm pretty self-aware. I know I'm not the fucking hero. I usually see myself reflected in one of the flawed characters that is slightly selfish, will end up making the right call, but sometimes for the wrong reasons. And he's who I see myself reflected in this movie. And to top it all off, I think he's got the most gruesome death out of anyone.
Dude.
When you walk into that room and he has been hung, drawn, and quartered, and he's hanging by his fucking back. Oh my God, what a fucking death.
Yeah, no, he's always incredible. And this is just another one of those roles where you're right, that stoic, no nonsense, just assholery that he brings to it is so perfect for what he had to be, because even at the beginning, you can tell that that's kind of what he is, his role in the crew, because when they're going around introducing everybody, Captain Miller's like, and over there's DJ. What do you do here? Like they're always fucking with him, because they're just trying to get a rise out of him, because he seems like the type of guy that doesn't happen much.
Right.
Because he's out to make sure everybody's okay. I love Jason Isaacs, but man, that death, God, if anything from this movie is gonna stick with you, that's gonna be a contender for, if you could only remember one thing from this movie, it's gonna be him just splayed out over that table with those hooks in his back. So, but as we've talked about all these characters, we need to get into the section because this is Space Horror Month. So in a section that we're calling Space Monster, we need to discuss the monster of this movie that is kind of referred to as the Dark, and kind of, what makes it horrifying, and is it a good monster, Dave?
I think that the monster here is the spaceship. The spaceship is the monster. And much in the same way that the Nostromo is its own character in Alien, the Event Horizon itself is its own character here. And I think if you take away the hell here, and it's not so much about the fact that this thing is infected with some sort of hellspawn. Space is so fucking scary that it's like, hey, this thing got lost and now it's back.
Yeah.
You can take out the whole warp drive angle of this thing and it still works because the unknown of space is the horror here. The fact that this thing knows everything about you because it gets inside your head, that's really scary. But if you look at some of the scariest space monsters, we've talked about the pod people. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We've talked about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and the horror there, which definitely comes from outer space, is that it comes to know you and can mimic you. Right. And I think that that's part of what we're afraid of with the unknown, is that you have to face yourself. You have to, as an explorer of space, be okay with spending time with yourself. And when all you have is time to listen to your own thoughts, you're going to dwell on stuff, because that's the stuff that keeps you up at night. When you've turned off the television and you've stopped doom scrolling on your phone, what do? Do you fall asleep right away? Well, if you've had a long day, maybe you do. If you've had a couple of drinks, maybe you do. But let's say you haven't had a long day. Let's say you haven't hit the sauce at all. What happens? You probably stay up that you did wrong, because it's never the stuff you did right.
Right.
Because that stuff puts to bed. But it's like, did I really say, like, the one thing that you fucked up that day? You know, like if you meant to say cool and great, and what you said was gruel, that's going to keep you up. That shit's going to keep you up. You know, if someone greeted you by saying, hey, what's up? And you say, great, how about you?
Yes.
That shit keeps you up.
Enjoy your meal. You too. That's the kind of damn it. That's all I'm going to think about for the next 3 hours.
Yes.
The good old you too.
It's 3 hours. Fuck. That shit haunts you forever. That shit haunts you forever, especially if you're on a date, especially if it's some sort of important meal. All right. Now imagine that, like, you've actually done some shit in your life. Right. That is what this thing is going to latch onto. This space monster is us. And ultimately, with every fucking monster, we've done a lot of these monsters now. What are we in June? We've done 6 months of this fucking stuff.
Yeah.
Every monster, if it's a good monster, is you. You are the monster. You are reflected in that monster. And in this way, even though this, I think, is a much more esoteric thing, and it's not really a concrete monster, we never see a monster. But fuck if it's not a great space monster.
Right. Yeah,
At least that's my thought.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's the dark as a monster. I think, you know, they call it the dark, you know, capital T, capital D, when Justin comes back. So it does give it some sort of essence, you know, like there's a concreteness to it there by giving it a name. But I think you're ultimately right. I mean, all this thing does is prey on you and your weaknesses. I mean, it ultimately breaks Weir down so much that he becomes a weapon for it. You know, he becomes part of the event horizon, and there's no escaping it. I think one of the things that makes it so scary is just that, is at the end of this, we see the XO Stark. Stark. We see Stark, you know, she sees herself being rescued, and then, oh no, it's Dr. Weir, and then it's not, but she's fine. So they made it away, but the Event Horizon never leaves you. There's a trauma to that you're never going to be able to fully escape. You know, there are plenty of things where you watch the movie and then ultimately, you know, the power of friendship or coming to terms with what you've done in your past destroys the monster and you're fine. But that's not what we get here, because even when you look at how they finally escape, as far as we know, they didn't actually blow up the man-made black hole. They just blew up the corridor that allowed them to separate from it.
Right. Yeah,
And
that thing went back. We saw it sink into the black hole.
Yeah. So whatever it was, whatever the dark was, it's still out there, just waiting for somebody else to punch a hole and to find it again. So it's got that extra layer of being scary. But man, ultimately, you're right. If something can see into your thoughts and make your work, I mean, it's what makes Pennywise so terrifying, right? He knows what scares you. And ultimately, that's what is going to always be the scariest monster, is what can personalize your hell, what can make it to where you will never forget this, and that the trauma of dealing with said monster will be with you for the rest of your life. And I think that the Event Horizon and the dark really did a lot, because when you're right, when this movie's off, like I went to sleep with I sleep with the TV on about 50% of the time, and last night was one of those nights where I was like, yeah, I need the noise. Like, I don't need to sit here and contemplate what horrible things the Event Horizon would make me see, right? Like what regrets I have that I would be living consistently until I killed myself. I don't need to think about that. So I'm sleeping with the TV on tonight. And that was just me as the watcher, you know, viewing this as a movie and something fictional.
Yeah.
So I think that ultimately that's what makes it a very effective space monster, and really unlike so many other things. You know, we make the comparisons to Hellraiser, but even Hellraiser wasn't like that. Hellraiser was just like, you fucked around and now you're going to find out. And then they just did things to you. They weren't personalized. You know, they weren't necessarily awful things based on your past. And so I think that is what steps this up from this. But you're right. The dark could be Pinhead. And this could, if at the end, if it had been like based on a Clive Barker book, I'd have been like, saw that coming.
Yeah.
You know, and so, yeah, I think that there is definite room to talk about, even though we never see a physical monster in this, other than if you consider like a possessed Sam Neill to be that monster, for this monster to be one of the most horrifying space monsters you're ever going to encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we're in agreement. This was the one place where I didn't know if we were both going to be in agreement, because you don't technically see a physical monster. You're right. The closest thing we get to that is Dr. Weir in like fully possessed by whatever this is. You know, and even so, is that really him?
Right.
I don't know.
Was it ever?
Was it ever him? Damn, that's a good question. I like that. I like that. That's where we're going to end this, on an existential question as we go into our ratings. So here on Shiver, we never rate anything with stars. If you rate things by stars, then you're comparing it to other things that have been rated by stars, which is fucking everything. And so we don't like that. We think everything should be judged only against itself. So, Daniel, out of a possible 5 poked out eyeballs, how many poked out eyeballs do you give Event Horizon?
Look, I think that if you've been with us now for 74 minutes, then you know exactly where this is going. I mean, one of the great things about the way that we've approached this year and taking on this idea of picking a genre so we can finally get to so many of these movies that we've talked about and never done an episode for is that we can do ones like this where, you know, we mix in the occasional one that's new to us, but we get to gush about things that are triumphs in the genre. And Event Horizon redefined space horror in much of the same way that Alien did in what was it, 79? So
79, yeah.
I mean, and so in much the way that it gave Alien 6 out of 5, I'm giving this one 6 out of 5 poked out eyeballs. This thing is going to be horrifying until the day I die. Every time I watch it, I'm going to be just as scared as I always am. It's always going to make me question a lot of things. This is another one. I mean, hang it from the rafters. This thing is perfect in everything that it does.
Same. I am giving this poked out. That is 3 people's worth of poked out eyeballs. And there's at least 2 people's worth of poked out eyeballs in this movie.
Yeah,
So,
well, and we and actually we do see 3 eyeless. We see at least 3 eyeless corpses because Claire never had eyes
without the eyeballs. So, this is not only accurate to Daniel and myself. This is accurate to the film, and I think that we here at Shiver strive to be as accurate as possible. We strive to look at things as objectively as possible. And so that therefore it has to be 6. It has to be 6. But also because this movie fucking rocks. And if you have never seen this movie before, you got to fucking watch this movie. Because we've talked about a lot of it, but you do not understand how great this movie is until you have watched this for yourself. It has such sights to show you. Please watch this movie and then watch it again.
Yes.
Don't stop watching this movie. I will never stop watching this movie.
No, I am going to recirculate this one more often now that I've been reminded how just absolutely amazing it is. And speaking of such sites to show you, make sure you head to shiverpod.com where you can find links to all of our social media outlets. We are on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. All of those places at ShiverPod, the most active one being our Instagram. There you can find memes, updates on movies that are coming out. Recently posted a picture of a billboard for advertisement for Long Legs with a very real and very terrifying phone number on it that I think that everybody who is excited for that movie should call and experience. Make sure you check us out on all of those. If you've got any ideas for stuff that we should be doing, we are going to be finishing up space horror next month, and then we'll be getting into kaiju month. So we've got a lot of things planned, but if you've got an idea for maybe one that we haven't heard of or that you think we definitely need to do, hit us up at either the Instagram DMs are great or shiverpod@gmail.com.
Absolutely.
And Dave, hold on, before you sign us off, do you want to tell them how we're going to finish space horror month next week?
No, I've forgotten.
Okay.
Do you want to remind me?
I was wondering if you remembered. Next week, we are going to go to the complete other side of the spectrum from the serious, dark, and everything is gruesome idea of Event Horizon. And we are wrapping Space Horror Month next week with Killer Clowns from Outer Space.
Fuck yes. I'm glad that this is what it was. I was hoping that that's what it was. And obviously we spoke about this, but my memory is for shit. For shit.
So yes. So in a true Joe Bob Briggs fashion, we are going to be approaching one of the schlockiest and just outrageous space horrors of all time. But I think next week's going to be a fun one. So make sure you check it out.
Absolutely. So on behalf of all of us here at Shiver, fight you very much.